For 6 days, the military K9 refused to eat. Not a single bite. The trainers tried everything. His favorite commands. His handler's boots beside the food bowl. Even the entire SEAL team came to see him. Nothing worked. The dog just lay there beside the empty kennel, waiting for a man who was never coming back. Because 3 weeks earlier, his SEAL handler had been killed during a mission. The base veterinarian finally warned the commanders, "If he doesn't eat today, we're going to lose him." Then the kennel door opened. A rookie waitress from the base diner walked in carrying lunch for the staff. The dog suddenly lifted his head, and for the first time in 6 days, he stood up. If you believe the loyalty between soldiers and their K9s should never be forgotten, comment where you're watching from and consider subscribing. The Naval Special Warfare Base had seen its share of difficult days, but this one felt heavier than most. The large kennel building sat near the far edge of the compound, away from the training ranges and command offices, where rows of reinforced gates and concrete runs housed some of the most disciplined military working dogs in the country. Most mornings the place echoed with sharp commands, the metallic clink of leashes, and the eager barking of K9s preparing for drills. But for nearly a week now, the energy inside the building had been strangely muted. Trainers moved more quietly. Conversations dropped into low voices. Even the other dogs seemed restless, sensing something was wrong with one of their own. In the final kennel on the left side of the building lay a Belgian Malinois named Rex, once known across the base as one of the most reliable K9s the SEAL teams had ever trained. Now he barely moved. 6 days earlier, Rex's handler had died. His name had been Jake Carter, a seasoned SEAL operator who had spent years building an unbreakable bond with the dog lying silently inside that kennel. For handlers, their K9 partner wasn't just another tool of the job. They trained together, deployed together, and trusted each other with their lives. Rex had followed Jake into buildings filled with explosives, tracked targets through miles of desert terrain, and cleared rooms that no human soldier could safely enter first. But 3 weeks earlier, during a night operation near the border, something had gone wrong. The details of that mission were still mostly classified, even to the trainers at the kennel, but everyone knew the result. Jake Carter hadn't come back. Rex had, and since the day the SEAL team returned without their handler, the dog had slowly stopped doing the one thing every living creature needs to survive: eating. At first, the trainers thought it was temporary. Dogs sometimes react strangely after stressful missions, especially ones involving explosions or injuries. They tried small changes to his routine, offering different food, bringing him outside for exercise, speaking to him with the same calm commands Jake had always used. But Rex didn't respond the way he normally would. Instead of rushing toward the bowl the moment food touched the ground, he simply stared at it for a moment and turned his head away. By the 3rd day, the trainers began to worry. By the 5th day, worry turned into something closer to fear. The base veterinarian was called in early that morning to examine him again. She knelt beside the kennel door while Rex lay with his head resting against the concrete floor, his eyes dull and unfocused. After checking his pulse and breathing, she stood slowly and shook her head. Physically, he's fine, she told the small group of SEALs and trainers gathered nearby. But if he keeps refusing food, he won't be for long. The words hung in the air long after she walked away. The SEAL operators standing near the kennel were men who had faced gunfire and explosions without hesitation, but watching a dog they had deployed beside slowly fade away was something else entirely. One of them quietly placed Jake's old boots beside the kennel entrance that afternoon, hoping the familiar scent might pull the dog out of whatever darkness he had slipped into. Another tried sitting beside the gate for an hour, speaking softly to Rex the same way Jake used to after long missions. But the dog didn't respond. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He barely even lifted his head. He simply lay there beside the empty space where his handler's voice used to be, waiting for a man who wasn't coming back. By the 6th day, the trainers had tried nearly everything they could think of. Different food brands, fresh meat, even a few of Jake's old training commands spoken by the team leader who had served with him the longest. Each attempt ended the same way. Rex would look briefly at the bowl and then settle back down, refusing to touch it. The kennel building felt quieter with every passing hour, as if everyone inside knew they were running out of time. Late that afternoon, a young trainer stood outside the gate staring down at the untouched bowl again. "He's starving himself," he muttered under his breath. The older handler beside him folded his arms, watching the dog with a tired expression. "He's grieving," the man replied. "Some dogs don't understand loss the way we do." The younger trainer shook his head slowly. He understands it too well. The sun had already begun to dip toward the horizon when the heavy metal door at the far end of the kennel building creaked open again. Normally, deliveries from the base diner arrived earlier in the day, but the cafeteria had been short-staffed that afternoon, and the evening meals for the kennel crew were running late. A woman stepped inside carrying a tray stacked with wrapped sandwiches and bottled drinks. She paused just inside the doorway, letting her eyes adjust to the dim fluorescent lighting that filled the long hallway of kennels. The trainers barely looked up at first, assuming it was the same delivery driver who usually dropped off meals for them during long training shifts. But this time the person carrying the tray wasn't someone they recognized. She looked younger than most of the base staff, wearing a simple diner uniform with a small name tag pinned to the collar. Blonde hair pulled loosely back, sleeves rolled up slightly as she balanced the tray against her hip. She glanced around the room with mild curiosity before starting toward the small break table near the center of the kennel. None of the trainers realized anything had changed until they heard the sound of claws scraping lightly against the concrete floor. The younger handler turned first. For a moment he thought he had imagined it, but then he saw the movement inside Rex's kennel. The dog's head had lifted from the floor. That alone would have been unusual after the way he'd spent the past 2 days lying motionless, but the trainers watched in stunned silence as Rex slowly pushed himself onto his feet. His body looked thinner than it had a week earlier, but the strength in his stance was unmistakable. His ears tilted forward slightly as he looked down the length of the kennel hallway, his nose lifting into the air. The older handler stepped closer to the gate, confused. "Rex?" he said quietly. The dog didn't look at him. Instead, his eyes remained locked on the woman walking toward the break table with the tray of food. The waitress hadn't even noticed the dog yet. She set the tray down on the table and began unwrapping the plastic covers, completely unaware that several hardened seal operators were now staring at the kennel behind her in disbelief. The younger trainer felt his heart begin to beat faster. "That's the first time he stood up all day," he whispered. The older handler didn't answer. His attention was fixed on Rex, who had now taken a slow step forward inside the kennel. Then another. The dog's movements weren't aggressive or frantic the way they might be during a training alert. Instead, they looked almost cautious, as if Rex was trying to confirm something his senses were telling him. The waitress turned slightly as she heard the trainers whispering, and that was the moment the dog finally saw her face. For the first time in 6 days, Rex walked toward the kennel gate, and every man in that building suddenly realized the same thing at the exact same moment. The dog wasn't moving because of the food. He was reacting to the waitress. For several long seconds after Rex stood up, no one in the kennel moved. The trainers simply stared at the dog as if they were watching something they didn't quite believe yet. 6 days of silence had conditioned them to expect nothing from him. But now the Belgian Malinois was standing at the front of the kennel, muscles tense, nose lifted toward the air as if he were trying to confirm a scent he hadn't encountered in a very long time. The waitress still hadn't noticed the sudden shift behind her. She was busy arranging wrapped sandwiches on the break table while the fluorescent lights hummed softly above her. One of the younger trainers slowly stepped closer to the kennel gate, careful not to startle the dog. "Rex?" he said quietly again. The dog didn't look at him. Instead, Rex took another slow step forward, eyes locked on the woman across the room. The older handler folded his arms, studying the scene with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Dogs reacted to many things: food, commands, familiar voices, but this felt different. Rex wasn't excited the way he normally would be during training. He wasn't barking or wagging his tail wildly. Instead, his posture was almost cautious, the way a dog behaves when it thinks it recognizes something important but hasn't fully confirmed it yet. The waitress finally turned around after hearing one of the trainers whisper her name. When she looked down the row of kennels, her eyes met Rex's. For a brief moment, she froze in place. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like surprise, like someone suddenly recognizing a face they hadn't expected to see again. The dog's ears lifted forward, and he took another step closer to the gate. The younger trainer noticed the waitress's expression immediately. "You okay?" he asked. She blinked once and forced a small smile, nodding casually as if nothing unusual had happened. "Yeah," she said. "Just wasn't expecting such a quiet kennel." She picked up one of the wrapped sandwiches and started walking toward the break table again. But Rex's reaction changed the moment she moved. The dog pressed closer to the gate, nose pushing against the metal bars as he inhaled deeply. The sound was soft but unmistakable, a dog testing the air, confirming a scent. The trainers exchanged quick glances. Rex hadn't shown that much interest in anything since Jay Carter's death. Not food, not commands, not even the other dogs barking nearby. Yet now he stood there, completely focused on the woman who had just walked in carrying their dinner. The waitress seemed to notice the dog's attention now. She glanced back toward the kennel, her curiosity growing as Rex continued sniffing the air. Slowly, she stepped closer to the row of cages. The trainers watched carefully, unsure how the dog might react. Normally, military K9s didn't interact with unfamiliar civilians without a handler present. But Rex wasn't behaving like a trained guard dog right now. His posture had softened slightly, his tail low but moving just enough to show interest. When the waitress stopped a few feet from the kennel door, Rex sat down. The motion was automatic, disciplined, the kind of sit-command handlers teach their dogs early in training. The younger trainer whispered under his breath, "He hasn't done that in days." The older handler leaned closer to the bars, watching the dog carefully. "He's not responding to us," he murmured. "He's responding to her." The waitress crouched slowly, keeping her movements calm and steady the way someone experienced with animals might. Up close, she could see how thin the dog had become after nearly a week without food. His ribs were beginning to show slightly under the coat, though the strength in his eyes remained sharp and alert. She didn't try to reach through the gate right away. Instead, she studied him for a moment as if searching her memory. The trainers waited for her to say something simple, maybe a friendly greeting the way civilians often spoke to dogs. But the words that came out of her mouth were something entirely different. "Easy, Rex," she said softly. "You're okay." The moment the name left her lips, the entire room went silent. The younger trainer's eyes widened. "How did she?" he started to ask, but the older handler raised a hand, signaling him to stay quiet. Rex reacted instantly to the sound of his name. His ears lifted higher, and he leaned forward until his nose touched the metal bars. The waitress watched him carefully, her expression calm but thoughtful. Then she did something that made the trainers exchange another stunned look. She raised her hand slightly and gave a short, subtle gesture toward the ground. "Sit and hold," she said quietly. The command wasn't loud, but it carried the unmistakable tone of someone used to giving instructions that had to be followed immediately. Rex sat perfectly still. The younger trainer blinked in disbelief. "That's a SEAL K9 command," he whispered. "Civilians don't know those." The older handler felt a slow realization beginning to form in the back of his mind. He had worked around military dogs long enough to recognize the difference between someone guessing a command and someone who knew exactly how to use it. The waitress wasn't guessing. Her posture, her calm voice, even the way she avoided sudden movements around the dog, all of it looked practiced.